Please, close your eyes for just a moment. Try to remember the crisp, cold air of a winter morning, the crunch of snow beneath your felt boots, and a metallic clinking of copper kopecks in your pocket. Can you smell the warm, comforting aroma of a fresh loaf of dark rye bread that you carried home from the corner bakery, biting off the crunchy crust along the way? We are traveling back in time, back to the Russia of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. Today, we are going to talk about 20 everyday things that were absolutely normal for us back then. These were the simple, unquestioned rituals of our youth. Yet, if you tried to do any of these things today, you would face heavy fines, strict bans, or even severe legal trouble. Our world has changed completely. And make sure to stay with me until the very end, because the last thing we will remember is a tiny glass vial from our grandmother's medicine cabinet that will surely make your heart ache with nostalgia. Time flowed differently back then. It moved slower, with a quiet, measured rhythm. We were never in a rush, because there were no mobile phones vibrating in our pockets, and no endless streams of digital information demanding our attention. We knew the true value of waiting. We waited for a handwritten letter to arrive in the metal mailbox. We waited for our favorite movie to be broadcast on the single television channel. And we waited for our friends to simply show up at our door without any prior warning. Modern society often tells us that our lives back then were harder, that we lacked the shiny conveniences of today. But they misunderstand something fundamental. We may have had fewer material possessions, but our emotional lives were infinitely richer. Our days were filled with genuine, face-to-face human connection, raw trust, and a kind of wild, unspoken freedom that modern generations can hardly comprehend. We lived openly, relying on our neighbors, our community, and our own common sense, long before the world became tangled in endless safety warnings and strict regulations. And now let us remember that incredibly hot summer day in the city, when the sun was melting the dark asphalt, and your only true salvation was the sparkling water vending machine on the corner. Do you remember that heavy, thick, faceted glass? There was only one single glass for the entire neighborhood. It stood there, upside down on a small metal grate, waiting patiently for the next thirsty person. You would drop a heavy 3-kopeck coin into the slot, hear the mechanical clunk inside, and press the glass down onto the rinser. A weak, brief stream of cold water would barely wash the inside, completely ignoring any modern hygiene standards. Then the machine would hiss loudly, dispensing a sweet, sticky pear or tarragon syrup, followed by a sharp burst of carbonated water. People of absolutely all ages, from dusty factory workers to small school children, drank from that exact same glass. No one wiped it with antibacterial wipes. No one worried about invisible threats. We shared it freely, trusting our neighbors entirely. Today, this beautiful communal ritual seems absolutely unthinkable. Health inspectors would shut down such a machine in a heartbeat, citing strict sanitary laws and public safety regulations. But back then, that single-faceted glass was a beautiful symbol of our unity, a shared oasis of joy on a bustling street. Let us travel back to a crisp winter morning. The snow is falling softly, covering the city streets in a sparkling white blanket. A young mother is walking to the local grocery store to buy a warm loaf of bread and a carton of milk. She is pushing a heavy, dark red leather baby pram on high, thin wheels. But she does not struggle to drag this bulky carriage inside the cramped, crowded store. Instead, she parks it right there on the snowy sidewalk, leaving her precious baby bundled up in thick woolen blankets, sleeping peacefully in the frosty air. She walks inside, joining the slow-moving queue, chatting with her neighbors for 15 or 20 minutes. Outside, strangers walk by, occasionally peeking inside the pram, smiling warmly at the sleeping child, perhaps adjusting a fallen blanket to keep the wind out. There was absolute, unspoken trust. No one even entertained the terrifying thought that someone might harm or steal the infant. Today, this beautiful display of community trust is considered a serious crime. If a mother did this now, someone would immediately call the police, and she would face severe charges for child endangerment and criminal neglect. The modern world demands constant surveillance, but back then, the entire neighborhood was your family. And now let us remember the dusty schoolyard during the long afternoon recess. You are a young boy, and deep in your pocket, you feel the heavy, comforting weight of a small folding pocket knife, perhaps with a brightly colored plastic handle. You and your friends gather near the old wooden fence, far from the paved asphalt paths. With a small stick, someone draws a large circle in the damp, dark earth. This was the legendary game of territory, known to all of us as Zemlya. You would stand perfectly still, aim carefully, and throw the open metal blade into the ground, claiming a piece of land with a satisfying, dull, metallic thud. We learned precision, respect for sharp tools, and the rules of fair play. Teachers would walk past, glance casually at the group of boys throwing sharp blades into the dirt, and simply ignore it. It was completely normal, just an ordinary part of growing up. Today, bringing any kind of knife onto school grounds is a severe criminal offense. It is legally classified as carrying a deadly weapon. The school would go into an immediate lockdown, the police would be dispatched, and the child would face severe legal trouble. The innocent thrill of conquering a small circle of dirt has been entirely replaced by metal detectors and zero-tolerance policies. Let us take a ride out into the countryside during the golden days of early autumn. Do you remember the time when entire schools, universities, and factories were sent to the collective farms to help harvest potatoes? The transportation was an adventure in itself. We would all pile into the back of an open, heavy wooden cargo truck, a classic Zill or Gaz. There were no comfortable seats, just rough wooden planks placed across the dusty truck bed. The heavy engine would roar to life, and we would bounce along the uneven, unpaved rural roads. The wind whipped through our hair, mixing with the smell of diesel exhaust and dry autumn leaves. We sang loudly, laughing as we held onto the wooden sides to keep from falling over whenever the truck hit a deep pothole. There was no roof, no seat belts, and absolutely no safety checks. We felt incredibly alive and free under the vast, open sky. Today, transporting people in the back of an open cargo truck is strictly illegal and highly penalized. Traffic police would immediately pull the driver over, issue massive fines, and impound the vehicle for severe safety violations. But for us, those dusty, bumpy rides in the open air were some of the most joyous and liberating moments of our youth. Do you remember the comforting sight of the local babushkas sitting near the bustling bus stops, or the entrance to the lively farmer markets? Picture an elderly woman, wrapped in a thick grey woolen shawl, sitting patiently on a tiny, handmade wooden stool. Beside her sat a massive, rough burlap sack filled to the brim with freshly roasted black sunflower seeds. As you approached, she would take a sheet of an old, read newspaper, perhaps yesterday's edition of Pravda, and expertly roll it into a perfect paper cone. Using a small glass, she would measure out a generous portion of the warm, fragrant seeds, pouring them into the paper cone. The wonderful smell of roasted oil and toasted seeds filled the air. Your fingers would turn slightly black from the newspaper ink and the roasted shells as you walked home, cracking them one by one. Today, this cozy, familiar street scene is completely illegal. Strict health departments and sanitary codes ban the sale of unpackaged food on the street. Selling homemade goods without proper licenses, health certificates, and sterile packaging is a violation of the law. The warm human exchange between a passerby and a street grandmother has been replaced by sterile plastic bags lining the shelves of massive, soulless supermarkets. And now, let us remember the great scrap metal drives of our school days, the legendary metalolum. Twice a year, The entire school would be tasked with collecting as much old metal as humanly possible. We were highly motivated, competing fiercely with other classes to win the grand prize. But think about how we did this. Groups of unsupervised 10-year-old children would wander deep into hazardous industrial zones, abandoned factory backyards, and overgrown construction lots. We would dig through piles of rusted debris, finding heavy, jagged iron pipes, discarded radiators, and sharp, twisted pieces of unknown machinery. We would drag these incredibly heavy, rusty objects across the neighborhood with our bare hands, bringing them proudly to the schoolyard mountain of metal. We got dirty, we got scratched, but we felt like true heroes contributing to the country. Today, sending children to scavenge for heavy metal in abandoned industrial sites is absolutely illegal. It violates strict child labor laws, trespassing regulations, and massive safety and health codes. The danger of tetanus, sharp edges, and collapsing structures makes it entirely unthinkable now. But back then, it was just a regular, exciting Tuesday afternoon in the life of a Soviet schoolchild. Let us talk about a ritual that was as dangerous as it was fascinating. Deep in the corners of the neighborhood courtyards, behind the long rows of metal garages, boys engaged in the ancient art of melting lead. We would hunt for discarded, heavy car batteries, smashing their thick plastic casings with heavy stones to extract the gray lead grids covered in toxic white acid powder. We would build a small smoky fire right on the ground, using dry branches and old newspapers. Placing the lead into an empty, rusted tin can, we watched in absolute awe as the dull, heavy metal slowly melted into a beautiful, shiny, silvery liquid. Using small molds pressed into wet clay or sand, we cast our own homemade fishing weights, small medals, or crude toy soldiers. The thick, toxic fumes of melting lead and burning plastic filled our lungs, yet we were completely oblivious to the terrible danger. Today, breaking open car batteries and melting toxic heavy metals over an open fire in a residential area is considered a severe environmental crime and an extreme health hazard. Hazmat teams would be called to clean up the toxic waste. But for us, it was our first magical lesson in metallurgy and chemistry, taught behind the garages. Do you remember the ultimate playground of our youth? It was not a colorful plastic slide with soft rubber flooring. It was the vast, imposing, and entirely unsupervised terrain of unfinished construction sites. Across the rapidly expanding cities, large panel buildings were constantly going up. After the workers left for the day, we would sneak past the sleeping watchman and enter a concrete wonderland. We climbed up the cold gray staircases with no railings, running across the third-story concrete slabs. We played intense games of hide-and-seek, jumping over terrifying gaps in the floor, and hiding behind stacks of hollow red bricks. We leapt into huge, soft mountains of yellow construction sand, ignoring the sharp, rusty rebar sticking out from the walls. It was incredibly dangerous, yet thrilling beyond measure. Today, strict security protocols, high metal fences, and surveillance cameras make this impossible. Allowing children to roam freely in an active construction zone is a massive legal liability, violating every single safety and trespassing law in existence. But for our generation, those cold concrete walls and piles of gravel were the castles and fortresses where our wildest childhood imaginations came to life. And now let us remember the deafening roar of a small two-stroke engine, echoing down a dusty village road. If you were a teenage boy in the 70s or 80s, your absolute greatest dream was to own a moped, perhaps a legendary Riga or a Verkovina. And when you finally got your hands on one, the freedom was intoxicating. You would carefully mix cheap gasoline with oil in the small tank, kickstart the pedal, and take off. We rode everywhere. We rode to the river, to the neighboring village, across fields and rough dirt paths. And we did it completely unprotected. No one wore a heavy safety helmet. No one had protective leather gear, and certainly no 12-year-old boy possessed a valid driver license. You would often have your best friend sitting dangerously on the tiny luggage rack behind you, the wind roaring in your ears. Today, letting a child ride a motorized vehicle on public roads without a helmet, license, or registration is a severe traffic violation. The police would immediately impound the moped and issue massive fines to the parents for child endangerment. But back then, that smell of burning oil and the wind in our unprotected hair was the pure, unadulterated smell of teenage freedom. Let us recall the deep, melancholic scent of autumn in the city courtyards. It is late October, and the leaves have fallen from the tall birch and maple trees, covering the ground in a thick, golden carpet. The local yard keeper, the dvornik, armed with a large broom made of bound birch twigs, would sweep the leaves into massive, towering piles. And then, as the evening approached, he would strike a match and set them on fire. Thick, white, sweet-smelling smoke would slowly rise, enveloping the entire neighborhood in a hazy, comforting fog. The scent of burning autumn leaves seeped into our clothes, our hair, and our memories. Children would run around the smoldering piles, sometimes throwing in a few potatoes to bake in the hot gray ashes. It was a beautiful, seasonal ritual that signaled the coming of winter. Today, setting open fires to burn wet leaves in residential areas is strictly banned, almost everywhere. Environmental protection laws prohibit it, due to air pollution, the release of toxic smoke, and the high risk of fire spreading to nearby buildings. You would face hefty fines from the city authorities, but for us, that sweet, smoky scent remains the ultimate, irreplaceable fragrance of our childhood autumns. Do you remember the excitement of a long family road trip to the southern sea, or just a simple weekend drive to the countryside, Dhaka? Picture the interior of a tiny, cramped Moskvich, a Zhiguli, or a proud, heavy Volga. The entire family is packed inside, surrounded by bags of food and camping gear. But look closely at the children. There were absolutely no bulky plastic car seats, no 5-point safety harnesses, and often not even basic rear seat belts. Young children would sit freely on the laps of their parents. Sometimes a tired child would climb up onto the rear window shelf, curling up like a cat directly under the hot sun, sleeping peacefully as the car bounced along the highway at 90 kilometers an hour. If a father was feeling generous, he might even let his young son sit on his lap in the front seat, letting the boy hold the heavy steering wheel on a quiet country road. Today, transporting a child without a certified safety seat is a severe violation of strict traffic laws worldwide. It is considered extremely reckless and dangerous. But back then, we rode untethered, experiencing the journey with a sense of innocent trust in our parents and the open road ahead of us. And now let us remember the dangerous, explosive chemistry experiments we conducted right on the asphalt of our courtyards. Every boy knew the secret recipe. You would go to the local store and buy a few boxes of cheap wooden matches. Then, using a small blade or a coin, you would carefully scrape off the dark red phosphorus heads until you had a small pile of highly flammable powder. The most common method was to take 2 heavy, thick metal bolts and screw them slightly into a single heavy metal nut, packing the red match powder tightly into the empty space between them, inside the nut. Then, you would take this heavy metal device and throw it with all your strength against a solid brick wall or hard asphalt. The impact would cause a deafening, echoing crack that sounded just like a real gunshot, sending the heavy bolts flying in opposite directions. Today, manufacturing such a device would be legally classified as creating a homemade explosive. The police would be called instantly, and teenagers doing this would face terrifying weapons charges and accusations of terrorism or severe vandalism. But for us, it was simply the loudest, most thrilling way to spend a Saturday afternoon. Let us step inside any public space during the 1970s. The first thing you would notice is the thick blue haze hanging heavily in the air. People smoked absolutely everywhere. Imagine boarding a sleek Aeroflot airplane for a long flight. As soon as the seatbelt sign turned off, half the passengers would pull out a pack of strong, unfiltered Velomorcanal or Cosmos cigarettes, lighting up right in their narrow seats. The cabin would fill with dense smoke, and no one complained because it was completely normal. The same was true for long-distance, overnight trains, where the narrow corridors between the sleeping compartments were constantly filled with men smoking and talking softly into the night. Even in hospitals, it was common to see a doctor smoking a cigarette right at his desk while writing a prescription. Today, this level of indoor smoking is entirely illegal. Strict public health laws have banned smoking in airplanes, trains, restaurants, and medical facilities, enforcing massive fines for any violations. The air is undeniably cleaner and healthier now, but looking back, that omnipresent cloud of tobacco smoke was simply an inseparable, unquestioned part of the atmosphere of our past. Do you remember waking up early on a warm summer morning to the loud, metallic, clanking sound echoing through the courtyard? It was the arrival of the milk barrel. A heavy yellow metal cistern on 2 wheels, pulled by a truck, would park right in the middle of the neighborhood. The vendor, usually a woman in a white apron, would open the heavy metal hatch. The entire neighborhood would line up, holding their own containers. The most popular vessel was the bidon, a 3-liter enameled metal can with a lid and a wire handle. The vendor would dip a long, heavy measuring scoop deep into the barrel and pour the rich, frothy, unpasteurized raw milk directly into your can. The milk was warm, incredibly fresh, and completely untreated by modern factory processes. Today, selling raw, unpasteurized milk from an open street barrel into unverified personal containers is heavily restricted or completely illegal under strict food safety and sanitary regulations. Health authorities worry about bacteria and contamination. But back then, that thick, creamy milk, poured straight from the yellow barrel into our enameled cans, was the most delicious and natural thing we had ever tasted. And now let us remember a simple, yet mesmerizing act of minor sabotage that brought us endless joy. You are standing near the tram tracks on a sunny afternoon. In the distance, you hear the heavy, rhythmic rumbling and the sharp bell of the classic, bright red and yellow Tatra tram approaching. You quickly reach into your pocket, pull out a heavy copper 3 kopeck or 5 kopeck coin, and place it perfectly flat on the shiny steel rail. Then you step back and wait. The massive iron wheels of the heavy tram would roll directly over the coin with a loud screech. As soon as the tram passed, you would rush back to the tracks to retrieve your treasure. The coin would be incredibly hot to the touch, flattened out into a smooth, thin, oversized copper disc, all the state emblems completely erased by the immense weight. Today, deliberately placing metal objects on the tracks of public railway transport is treated as a serious legal offense. It is classified as tampering with railway infrastructure and dangerous vandalism, carrying severe fines. But for a curious child in the 70s, flattening a coin under a tram was a fascinating, magical display of raw mechanical power. Let us recall the incredible freedom of exploring the hidden, elevated world above our cities. In those days, the heavy iron or wooden doors leading to the roofs and basements of the 5-story Khrushchevka apartment buildings were almost never locked. They were wide-open invitations to adventure. We would climb the dusty, dark staircases all the way to the top, pushing open the heavy hatch to step out onto the flat, tar-covered roof. It was our private sanctuary. We would sit on the edge with our legs dangling, watching the fiery orange sunset over the city, sunbathing on hot summer days, or just hiding from our strict parents. Below us, the dark, winding basements with their warm heating pipes provided a perfect refuge during the freezing winters. Today, Free access to roofs and basements is strictly prohibited. Heavy steel doors are permanently locked, secured with heavy padlocks and electronic alarms, mandated by strict fire safety codes and anti-terrorism laws. The magical, elevated world where we spent our teenage years talking about life and first love has been permanently sealed away, leaving modern children grounded on the safe, heavily monitored asphalt below. Do you remember the glorious ritual of buying draft beverages on a hot evening? Men would gather around the small green street kiosks or the large yellow barrels that sold cold fermented kvass or fresh draft beer. But they rarely used the small glass mugs provided by the vendor. Instead, they came fully prepared. They brought their own massive, heavy, 3-liter glass jars from home. The vendor would insert the hose and fill the giant glass jar to the very brim with dark, foaming liquid. Some men, lacking a jar, would even ask the vendor to pour the beer directly into a thick, washed-out plastic bag, carrying the heavy, sloshing liquid home like a precious treasure. And if they did use the communal glass mugs, they were merely rinsed briefly with cold water by pressing them onto a small, star-shaped fountain. Today, strict sanitary codes and health department regulations completely forbid street vendors from pouring beverages into unverified, unsterilized personal containers, let alone plastic bags. Using a shared, barely rinsed mug is equally illegal. The colorful, chaotic, and deeply communal experience of standing around the barrel with our own glass jars has been replaced by sterile, sealed plastic bottles. And now, let us remember the absolute, unconditional trust we had in the adult world when it came to traveling. Imagine you're a young teenager, 10 or 12 years old, spending the summer in a rural village. You desperately want to go to the river, which is 5 miles away. You simply walk to the edge of the dusty dirt road and raise your hand. Soon, a loud, heavy tractor or a large collective farm truck passing by would slow down to a halt. The rugged, unknown driver, a complete stranger, would open the heavy door and tell you to hop up into the high cabin. You would ride alongside this stranger, chatting about the weather or the harvest, and he would drop you off exactly where you needed to go. Parents did not panic, because they knew the unspoken rule. Adults always looked out for children. Today, the idea of an unaccompanied child hitchhiking on a rural road and a random stranger pulling over to pick them up is absolutely terrifying. It triggers immediate panic, Amber Alerts, and fears of kidnapping. A driver doing this today could face severe police questioning. Our modern world has lost that incredible, society-wide trust that once made such innocent journeys possible. Let us take a walk into the nearby woods to craft the most essential tool of our childhood, the homemade wooden slingshot. We would spend hours searching for the absolute perfect, symmetrical Y-shaped branch, usually from a sturdy hazel or rowan tree. We would carefully carve the bark off with our pocket knives. Then, we would visit the local pharmacy to buy a length of thick, gray rubber medical tourniquet. We attached it to the wooden frame, using a piece of tough leather cut from the tongue of an old, discarded shoe for the pouch. Armed with our beautiful, powerful new tools, we would roam the streets, shooting unripe green rowan berries or small, smooth pebbles at empty tin cans, and sometimes, unfortunately, at the glowing glass bulbs of street lamps. Today, walking around a city neighborhood with a powerful, homemade wooden slingshot, firing hard projectiles, is heavily policed. It is widely considered a dangerous weapon and a tool for vandalism. If a child were caught doing this today, parents would be heavily fined for property damage and reckless endangerment. But for us, making a slingshot was a rite of passage, a test of our craftsmanship and our wild, adventurous spirit. Finally, let us remember a small, magical object that lived in the medicine cabinet of absolutely every single grandmother in the country. A tiny, tightly sealed glass vial filled with dark, almost black-purple crystals. This was potassium permanganate, lovingly known to all of us simply as margansovka. It was the ultimate, universal cure for everything. If you scraped your knee badly on the asphalt, grandmother would dissolve a few tiny specks in a glass of water until it turned a bright, beautiful pink, and wash your wound. If you had a severe stomachache, you were forced to drink a pale pink glass of it. Even newborn babies were bathed in water tinted pink with these magical crystals. Today, however, going to a pharmacy and freely buying concentrated potassium permanganate crystals is practically impossible, and in many places entirely illegal without strict prescriptions. Due to its highly reactive chemical nature and its potential use in manufacturing illegal explosives, it has become a tightly controlled substance. We lost our magical pink water, but thinking about that tiny glass vial today brings back the incredibly warm, comforting feeling of our grandmother's gentle hands, caring for us with nothing but simple remedies and boundless love. When we look back at these 20 memories, we realize something profound. We do not necessarily miss the danger, the lack of seatbelts, or the toxic smoke. What we truly miss is the incredible feeling of freedom, the deep innocence of our youth, and the absolute trust we had in the world and the people around us. We miss a time when life was governed by common sense and community, rather than a thick book of sterile laws and endless safety warnings. If these memories brought a warm smile to your face, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It truly helps us keep this history alive. Now I have an important question for you. Which of these 20 things do you remember doing the most vividly? Or perhaps you have your own story of a wild childhood adventure that would be completely illegal today. Please, write your personal stories in the comments below. I read every single one, and your memories are the true history of our generation. Thank you for walking down this beautiful, nostalgic road with me. And until we meet again, keep your memories warm.